that Jesus begins this portion of his sermon by saying, hey, we shouldn't judge each other. Whatever standard it is that you use to judge other people will be applied to you as well. By the way, before you criticize your friend or your neighbor or your brother for having a flaw, you probably should pay attention to whether you have that same flaw, only bigger. There's a whole psychological term for that. It's called projection. When we are blind to our own faults, when we are blind to our own pain, our own trauma, and then we project that onto other people and we see it all over them and we criticize them and we critique them for it, Jesus says, pay attention to the plank in your own eye first. And then he goes on to say, in the context of judgment, he goes on to say, don't throw your pearls before pigs and dogs. Now, Willard's point is, pearls are not nourishing to pigs and dogs. They're of no use to them. They can't eat them, and if they tried to eat them, they wouldn't be of any good to them. And so that's why they get angry and they turn and they become vicious. Because what we think is valuable, we've cast in front of them, and it just makes them mad because it's of no use. Willard's point is, that's what we do when we give good advice to people. When you give good advice to people, Willard says, that's really just our way of condemnation engineering. In other words, it's really just our way of trying to control them. It's an expression of judgment. You know, in January of 2018, there were 4 psychological studies published. And what those studies found were all the same, 4 different sort of takes on this same reality. What those studies found is that giving advice to another person is very empowering for the person giving the advice. Not so much for the person receiving it. And what these studies found primarily was 2 things. Number 1, it found that if you were a person who felt powerless, who felt like you didn't have much control in your life, a really effective way of gaining a sense of power was to give advice to somebody else. That it made you feel powerful. And people doing that, people who feel powerless, who then give advice to other people, this is true face-to-face and online, by the way. They conducted those studies in both environments. Face-to-face and online, that when you give advice to somebody else, it makes you feel better about yourself. The second thing that it found, which was closely related and should not be a surprise to anybody in this room, is that the people who seek and desire power the most are the people who give the most advice.